This is a story of land, claim, and memory, of promises that echo across millennia. From biblical texts to modern borders, the same landscape carries different histories. This film draws parallels between ancient narratives of conquest and the modern struggle over Canaan and Palestine. It asks how claims, religious and political, shape who belongs and who is displaced. We examine scripture, archaeology, modern politics, and contested memories. And we compare ancient claims, Abraham, Moses, with 20th and 21st century events. This is not a simple indictment. It is a careful tracing of patterns. Faces and places repeat, consequences persist. We move from ancient narratives to modern politics, ending with today's humanitarian realities. Listen for evidence, interpretation, and the human costs between them. Jewish attachment to the land begins in texts. Genesis and Exodus anchor identity. Abraham receives a divine instruction to move to Canaan, a claim central to tradition. But archaeology provides no direct proof that God spoke to Abraham. Scholars often read these accounts as theological narratives rather than literal records. The Exodus story, Moses leading people from Egypt to Canaan, has powerful cultural weight. Yet large-scale archaeological confirmation of a mass migration is lacking. Joshua's campaigns in the Book of Joshua describe city destructions and expulsions. These texts describe violence toward Canaanite inhabitants that set a narrative precedent. A pattern emerges, territorial claims justified by higher authority, divine or national. We will trace that pattern through modern history. After centuries of diaspora, the modern Zionist movement reimagined political return. Figures like Theodor Herzl argued for a Jewish state as refuge and remedy. Rising anti-Semitism, pogroms and court cases, made the idea urgent for many Jews. Events like the Dreyfus Affair crystallized the political Zionist argument. From the first Aliyah onward, settlers purchased land and built communities under Ottoman rule. These were nationalist projects, not theocratic conquests, yet land changed hands. The 1917 Balfour Declaration signaled British support for a national home for the Jewish people. It reshaped political possibilities in Palestine. In 1947, the UN proposed partition, a solution to competing national claims. But partition provoked immediate conflict on the ground. The 1948 war produced the Nakba, 700,000, 800,000 Palestinians displaced. Villages emptied, lives and claims were fractured. Events like Deir Yassin, where over 100 Palestinians were killed in April 1948, spread fear and flight. These incidents fed wider displacement across the region. Some historians and critics see parallels between biblical expulsions and modern displacements. The moral question then, as now, is whether territory acquired by force can be justified. Zionists reference Genesis 15. Land promised from the river of Egypt to the Euphrates. But scripture does not map cleanly onto modern nation-states. Many religious texts treat the promise as conditional or spiritual rather than absolute land title. Interpretation, not literal decree, has guided much of theological debate. Groups like Neturei, Karta, and some Satmar Hasidim reject a secular Jewish state before the Messiah. They base opposition on Talmudic passages and a belief that earthly sovereignty is premature. Ketubot 111a and other texts are cited to argue against ascending by force. Jewish thought on statehood is diverse and contested. In our final section, we examine Gaza, a place where ancient patterns meet modern warfare and law. Here, the human cost is front and center. We begin with the ancient claims and their evidence. What do the sources actually show? Genesis places Abraham's origin in Ur, in ancient Mesopotamia. Scripture frames migration as divine command, a theological foundation. But archaeological layers and material culture do not confirm a miraculous directive. Scholars treat the stories as faith documents with historical elements. The Exodus narrative claims a mass departure from Egypt, laden with plunder, according to Exodus. Archaeologists debate roots, dates, and the size of the population involved. Joshua's campaigns depict cities taken and populations destroyed, Jericho, i.e., among them. Many scholars interpret these as theological narratives asserting divine victory. The motif is clear: conquest justified by higher sanction, leading to displacement. This pattern is what critics see echoed centuries later. Within Jewish tradition, these stories shaped identity and the idea of sacred land. But sacred meaning does not equal documentary proof of events as modern historians demand. Comparisons of texts and material remains often show mismatch in scale and detail. Many historians treat these books as theological constructs preserving memory in symbolic form. Does a story grant a perpetual territorial title? That is the central question. Ancient claims meet modern legal and political frameworks, not divine certainties. Biblical narratives normalize conquest framed as moral or divinely sanctioned. That framing influences communities' views of land and entitlement. But by the late 19th century, the claim evolved into a national political movement. Herzl reframed return as modern statecraft, not purely divine mandate. The link to scripture remained culturally potent, even as motives shifted to refuge and nationhood. Practical settlement projects rewrote landscapes and claims. Scholars differ on how literally to read the conquest accounts and on the ethical lessons drawn. Three lenses, theology, symbolism, history, give different answers. In short, ancient texts anchor identity and claim, but their historical specifics are debated. Next, the modern story of state formation and displacement. We carry those narratives into the 20th century, where politics, war, and law collide. The stakes now include millions of lives and new legal frameworks. Modern statehood invokes treaties, declarations, and international law, not scripture alone. We turn now to how those instruments shaped Palestine in the 20th century. Herzl's political vision moved from pamphlet to settlement to international diplomacy. British support altered the political ground in Palestine. UN Resolution 181 proposed separate Jewish and Arab states and a special regime for Jerusalem. The plan sparked war and mass movements of population. The Nakba displaced between 700,000 and 800,000 Palestinians. Entire villages emptied. Deir Yassin is one such flashpoint cited as causing panic and flight. Abandoned possessions became evidence of sudden displacement. Memory and loss passed down generations on both sides. Modern Zionists mostly framed statehood as national necessity, not theological decree. Yet scriptural language continued to be invoked rhetorically. Groups like Neturei Karta publicly opposed the state on halakhic grounds. They cite Talmudic injunctions against creating Jewish sovereignty before messianic redemption. Gaza, densely populated and under blockade since 2007, faces acute humanitarian pressures. UN agencies report high dependency and food insecurity. Operations such as Cast Lead 2008-09 and Protective Edge 2014 produced large civilian tolls. Those figures underline the scale of suffering in modern conflict. Human rights groups accused Israeli actions of disproportionate force and policies worsening civilian harm. Critics use reports and images to argue for accountability. International bodies increasingly examine allegations, including recently investigations touching on genocidal claims. Legal processes are slow, but they reshape international perspectives and policy debates. Israel consistently frames military action as security measures against threats like rocket fire and militant groups. These claims are central to Israel's public defensive operations. Critics counter that civilian harm and infrastructure destruction cannot be chalked solely to unavoidable security needs. They highlight long-term humanitarian impacts alongside immediate security concerns. The film's central question: do modern actions replicate an ancient pattern of displacement? We must weigh continuity in rhetoric and discontinuity in legal and moral standards. Modern international law rests on evidence and accountability, not divine mandate. That changes the moral calculus compared to ancient claims. Religious dissenters have sometimes allied with Palestinians to oppose Zionism politically. These unlikely alliances highlight the diversity of Jewish opinion. Both Israeli and Palestinian civilians endure fear, loss, and displacement in different forms. Numbers are vital, but each figure is also a life and a story. The world responds through diplomacy, sanctions, and legal forms, rarely with simple answers. Media narratives shape public perception and policy pressure. If ancient texts inspired claims, modern actors must answer to modern ethics. That requires accountability, testimony, and restitution where possible. Scholars and activists point to dialogue, rights-based frameworks, and international law as paths forward. 3 practical steps to break cycles of violence. Future peace requires prioritizing human dignity over exclusive territorial claims. Practical compassion can interrupt historical patterns of conquest. From Abraham to Gaza, narratives of promise and power intersect with human consequence. We must judge modern actions by modern standards, evidence, law, and shared humanity. For history enthusiasts, read primary sources, consult diverse scholars, and hold institutions accountable. Seek varied perspectives and primary documents. History gives us patterns, choice gives us a chance to change them. Credits, sources, and further reading follow, and the conversation continues.